Chapter 5. When the dog saw the canoe move towards shore, she at first moved to meet it, head down, tail wagging, but Brian hesitated just once more before touching the bank with the bow of the canoe. This was all very strange, and strange things in the bush often deserved more study. The dog was here. She greeted Brian as a friend. But why? Why a dog? Why was it here? Was there more to it? More people? Here, something possibly not good waiting for him on the bank. But he waited just a few seconds because when he was this close, the dog first sat, whimpering with pain, and then lay down on her good side with the wound up and waited, just waited for Brian. It was enough, and he pushed up on the bank and jumped out of the canoe. He went up to the dog and knelt next to her. Of course, it was still dark, but there was the half moon, and he saw that most of the wound, a foot and a half long, ripped down the side. It was very superficial, just breaking and peeling back the skin, and it had clotted well. Here and there wet blood oozed, but even as he watched, it seemed to diminish. Still, it needed tending to, and to do that, he needed light and fire. "You stay here," he told the dog. "I have to get wood and make a fire." Either because she understood, or perhaps that she was in pain, the dog stayed by the front of the canoe while Brian moved to the moonlight and found dead wood and dry grass and started a small fire nearby. He took a burning stick and held it closer to see better, and it frightened the dog. "Easy, easy. I have to see it." He put his hand on the dog's head, and she settled immediately, responding to the soothing sound of his voice. Brian held the light up again, and in the relative brightness saw that the rip, however it had been caused, had torn back a flap of shoulder skin, about half as big as his palm. He could see exposed flesh, muscle. Although the meat was not too damaged, he knew he would have to fix it in some way to cover it. "Or sew it up," he said aloud. "I have some fishing line and a needle. I wonder if you would let me sew that flap down." He went to the canoe and got out his sewing repair kit. He had thread there, but thought it might be too light for the job. Would pull out. The fishing line would work better, except that he would have to use a large needle with it. This, he thought, moving back to the dog, could go wrong in many ways. She wasn't a really large dog, perhaps 40 pounds, but she had teeth, and Brian had seen dogs fight in the city, and had seen wolves kill deer, and knew that those teeth could do. What those teeth could do. He read somewhere that the teeth at the back, the molars, even in a moderate dog, could come down within 2,600 pounds per square inch. The cross-section of the bone in my arm, he thought, is about a square inch. Still, he couldn't leave that wound that way. "I have to hurt you," he said to the dog, petting her head. "I'm sorry, but we have to sew that up. I'll talk and tell you what I'm going to do. But if we don't sew it up and cover it, the flies will plant eggs in it." All the time he was talking, and he was preparing himself, kneeling by the dog, threading the fish line through the needle in the firelight. In itself, no mean feat, and hoping his talk would soothe the dog. "I'm going to clean the wound with a little water," he said, dipping water from the lake. He knew it wasn't hygienic, but the wound was full of dirt and grass, and the water was cleaner than that. He thought of boiling it, but then he would have to wait for it to cool, and that would take too long. The dog was steady now, but might not hold for a long time. He washed the wound with water as best as he could, splashing it gently until the water ran clear, without blood or dirt, and then folded the flap of skin back up over the wound, opening, and was dismayed to find that it was too small to cover the space. It lacked a quarter inch all around, seemed to have shrunk. He would have to pull it and stretch it back while he sewed it. He winced, thinking how it would feel to do it to himself. First stretched his skin, and then pull a large needle with fish line through it again and again. The dog had remained quiet while he washed and pulled the flap back over, quieter than Brian would have believed. But he did not believe she would lie still for what was coming. "It's more of a problem than I thought," Brian said. "Maybe going to hurt a little more." Later, much later, he would remember talking to the dog that first night as if she were a person and would not think it odd. Never thought it odd. He talked to all animals, deers, birds, wolves, sometimes even fish. But only the dog seemed to understand, seemed to know what he meant. "Well," he thought, "here goes." He pulled the flap, had to tug it sharply into one place, and took the first stitch with the needle. Surprised at how hard he had to push to get the needle through the skin. It was almost like cured leather, and he had to exert way more force than he thought the dog would tolerate, just for the first edge. Then he had to pull and tug the flap of the skin into position and push the needle through the second edge, again having to push very hard to get even the sharp needle through the hide. Then pull the two edges together with the string and tie a first knot to hold it. Then move a quarter of an inch, which seemed about right, and pull it through again, and again, and again, and talking all the while, waiting for the dog to come around and hit him. "You're such a tough dog. I couldn't take this, I know. You must have good genes, tough genes, a tough mother and a tough father. To take this pulling and pushing and poking, just keep taking it and taking it." His voice even and smooth, trying to calm the dog, ease her mind. But not once did the head come around. Only at first, when Brian jerked the string to pull the two edges together, was there a reaction, a slow, deep rumbling from the dog's chest and the head coming up. But it was not a growl so much as a moan, and the head came around it. Never came around. The teeth never bared. The dog just looked at him, looked right into Brian's eyes in the firelight, a look of understanding, of complete and utter trust. And then the head went back down. And there were no more rumbles, no more moans, no more glances. She lay there with her eyes closed, content to let Brian work, almost relaxed. 32 stitches Brian had sewn. Each one knotted in place, 20 across the top and 12 down the front side, all about a quarter of an inch apart, all tightly sewn, and pulling the flaps together, and then it was done. He had a small first aid kit in the canoe, and he took out the disinfectant. It was not enough to have washed the wound, but he trickled it in a line along the sewn-up seam edges. And it must not have been painless, as the bottle said, because the dog rumbled again, and she didn't open her eyes or change her breathing. Then it was done. Brian cleaned the needle and put the kit away in the canoe, washed the blood from his hands in the lake, found more wood for the fire, and built the flames up. The dog stayed where she was, 4 or 5 feet from the fire, and rested. So Brian could hear the sound of her snoring over the crackle of flames. Brian squatted by the fire and let his mind float free, glad the dog was so friendly, and glad he hadn't been bitten. He looked to the east and thought he could see a glow, maybe a couple hours to daylight, and then what? Try to figure it out, he thought. The dog was clearly not wild, clearly friendly to people, and had heard, smelled, felt that Brian was out in the lake sleeping in his canoe, had wakened him by whining. Clearly wanted help. But where had she come from? There was no collar on her. Brian had checked that right away, and it was her, not a him. Brian had also seen that, but she wasn't just a loose wild dog. She must have come from a trapper's camp somewhere, maybe a Cree camp, perhaps near, perhaps far. She must belong to somebody, but Brian had seen or heard absolutely no sign at all of any people anywhere within miles. And if there had been a camp or people, he would know. Animals in the bush react to people, feel differently if there was any doubt and anyone about. And he had not felt that difference, nor had he seen tracks, smudges in the grass, had not smelled smoke. Nobody was close. And yet, here was the dog, obviously a person dog, a dog that wanted to be with humans, a dog that couldn't hunt for herself well. She looked thin and needed to be with people, yet had, for some reason, left her people. No sense there, Brant thought. He put more wood on the fire and studied the dog in the brighter light. The dog slept soundly, snoring gently, the wounded side moving up and down. Brian liked the sound of her breathing, and he thought of never having a dog. There had always been a reason. Some reason his parents would not let him have one. They were too dirty. They shed hair. His mother had allergies. He was responsible to take care of a puppy. Lord, back there, his parents. He shook his head. Had that ever been real, that life? The whole silliness? He watched the wound moving with the dog's breathing. The wound came from a fight with someone or something. There was a slash wound, not from a fall or hitting a stick. How about that? A fight with another dog. He had considered the possibility of working on the dog. It had been in a major battle with another dog and had been driven out. But Brian wasn't sure if that sort of thing happened outside Jack London's novels, and he had come to realize that much of what Jack London wrote about the bush was utter nonsense. He might have been a tough man, and he might be a good writer, but he also been a hammered drunk, and there was a lot of silliness in what he said about wilderness. Besides, most people wouldn't let a fight get that far out of hand. A dog that was ripped up that badly couldn't do much work for a while, and trappers' dogs were used for work. Packing, pulling toboggans, and he didn't think a dog that liked people as much as this one seemed to would have leave just because of a fight. So something else. But nothing else made sense. The dog wouldn't leave her alone unless she was driven out and the wound was serious enough. Wolves? Brian's thinking rolled 3. Perhaps the dog was out away from camp, hunting or something, and ran into a pack of wolves. Say they hit her, wound her. In a panic, she doesn't run home, back to her camp, but runs off, and maybe confused, bewildered. But she comes to the lake and finds Brian sleeping in his canoe. No, if wolves had hurt her, and Dave Smallhorn had told him that sometimes they killed small dogs and ate them, she would have either run back into the camp or the wolves would have finished her, eaten her. No dog in the world would outrun or outfight a wolf pack. The wound didn't seem to have been a man-made, but that was a possible explanation, and one that made sense. If a man was cruel enough to injure a dog this badly, the dog might run off and not come back. And Brian knew that there were men that bad. He had read about them, seen them in the news. Beastmen. But that wound didn't seem to be a cut either. It did not seem to have been made by a weapon, but by teeth or claws. There were some big cats. Brian had seen a lynx on several occasions, and a 40-pound lynx certainly could inflict a wound like this. But a lynx could easily get away from a dog if the dog was foolish enough to chase him. And there were rare mountain lions here in the bush, called panthers or painters in the north country, but the same rule applied. While they could easily wound or kill a dog, they much preferred to avoid conflict. They would kill and eat a person rather than tangle with the dog, unless it was small. Brian had seen several accounts of mountain lions stealing poodles and other small dogs from homes around Los Angeles. One mountain lion there had actually taken a woman who was jogging near L.A., killed her, dragged the body up, and eaten part of it. But not dogs. That wouldn't explain the dog leaving its camp.